They never saw it coming. That's the beauty of restraint. When you play the long game, your final move doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives with silence, sharp enough to sever history. They mistook your composure for hesitation, your patience for uncertainty. But all along you were calculating. Not out of revenge, but precision. You let them play their games, take their shots, parade their temporary victories as if permanence was theirs to claim. And then, when it no longer served your evolution, you moved. Not with theatrics, with intention. One final move, a shift in energy so complete, it shattered their illusion of control and lit up the battlefield in a way they never expected. You didn't win because you fought harder. You won because you stopped playing. It's your victory. And that last move, it rewrote everything. They had you cornered, or so they believed. They built their confidence on your compliance, their identity on your reaction. Every time you forgave what was never apologized for, they logged it as a win. Every time you explained what never deserved a question, they twisted it into guilt. You were always supposed to fold. That was the rule. That was the rhythm. Until it wasn't. Until you left the room. Until you stood still and watched them fall apart, trying to provoke the version of you that no longer existed. The most dangerous kind of strength is the kind they can't quantify. That's what you became. You didn't rage, you withdrew. And that withdrawal, it was surgical. It was final. It was your last move, and it dismantled their entire sense of power. The mind of a manipulator requires repetition. It feeds on loops, emotional, psychological, energetic. But your exit was a system break, a tear in their reality. You see, toxic people don't fear confrontation. They crave it. It validates their role, makes them the misunderstood hero in their distorted narrative. But when you stop responding, when you stop engaging, when you remove the battlefield entirely, they are left fighting ghosts. Your silence became the haunting. Your absence, the loudest accusation. You made them answer questions in their own head they were never prepared to face. You made them feel something they rarely feel: irrelevance. And to the ego of someone who needs power like air, that is a slow psychological death. They don't talk about it openly, but they relive it privately. That final moment, that last message you never sent, the call you never returned, the emotion you never explained. It replays in them because it didn't end the way they rehearsed. You see, they needed closure on their terms. They needed to feel like they still had access to your mind, your soul, your kindness. But you slammed that door with grace. No theatrics, just the kind of detachment that only comes from deep healing. And that is the victory. Not that you left, but that you left with clarity. You didn't just walk away. You walked away aware. And no story survives once the audience no longer believes the lead. Psychologically, they're in free fall. Not because of what you did, but because of what they can't undo. They're stuck at the chapter you refuse to co-write. That's the real punishment. Not vengeance, but silence. You became the one who got away. Not in love, but in truth. They can't replicate your energy. Can't replace your presence. Because you were never just a person to manipulate. You were the mirror that eventually shattered and stopped reflecting their carefully manufactured image. Now, every time they look at someone new, they remember how you made them see themselves. And that kind of revelation doesn't fade. It festers. It lingers. It stings. Your victory wasn't in a scream. It was in a smile. A calm, sovereign acknowledgement that you were done giving CPR to connections built on control. You stopped negotiating with your own boundaries. Stopped selling your softness to those who cashed it in for power. And in doing so, you shattered the framework of someone who relied on your forgiveness like fuel. Now they're watching you from a distance, trying to decipher the glow you carry. They think it's luck. They think it's pride. But it's freedom, it's self-procession, and most terrifying of all, it's indifference. You're no longer moved by them. And they are addicted to moving people. You became the ending they can't rewrite, the chapter they can't edit out. They tried to paint you in their narrative as unstable, emotional, vindictive. But your composure made the paint run. You held your silence like a scalpel, cut deeper without saying a word. And that's what makes you dangerous now. Not your ability to destroy, but your ability to walk away whole. They can't explain it to others, not convincingly, because there's nothing dramatic about your exit. It was surgical, clean, inevitable. And every time they try to tell the story, it collapses under the weight of its own fabrication. Because you didn't react the way they needed. You reacted the way they feared. And the aftermath? That's their chaos now. They sit in the quiet you left behind and feel the holes. Holes they thought they could patch with lies. But your absence reveals too much. It rewrites the room. It turns their allies into skeptics. It makes the ones who once doubted you start to question the entire performance. Because your final move was more than escape. It was a statement. It was the pivot that made the truth louder than their words. You weren't proving anything. You were living it. You weren't trying to expose them. You just stopped covering them. And in that decision, everything unraveled. They want the explosion. They crave it. The scream, the accusation, the thrown plate or shattered timeline. They bait you with silence, with betrayal dressed in passive aggression, with calculated jabs masked as jokes, all in the hope that you'll erupt. Because once you explode, they get to play the victim. The chaos you release becomes the shield they hide behind. But when you don't take the bait, when you respond with stillness, with grace sharpened into steel, with restraint, they don't know where to put their shame. There's beauty in restraint, and toxic people hate this. Not because it's ineffective, but because it's devastating. They built their entire identity on the assumption that they can control your emotional temperature. But when you become unmoved, unreadable, unfazed, they unravel. You didn't hold back because you lacked words. You held back because you outgrew the need to waste them. You knew that anger would give them ammunition, that tears would feed their narrative, that emotional reactivity would play directly into their hands. So instead, you sat with your truth like a blade hidden beneath silk. Not to attack, but to end what needed ending without spectacle. You didn't explode, you evaporated. You became unreachable, detached, sovereign. And that distance, that quiet discipline, it burns them more than 1,000 insults ever could, because it says, without a single word, you are no longer worth my energy. They can't tolerate what they can't control. Your restraint was not a retreat, it was a declaration, a silent revolution. You refused to dance in their chaos, refused to play the villain in their script. You rewrote the ending by not giving them one. And now they're left in limbo, grasping at straws, retelling stories that fall flat without your fury to validate them. Their narrative depends on your reaction. Your silence erased the scene. You didn't storm out. You evaporated. And in doing so, you took the one thing they can't manipulate: your dignity. Toxic people see restraint as weakness because they measure strength by volume. But real power is measured by control. You didn't need to raise your voice because your absence is loud enough. You didn't need to justify your pain because your composure was the proof. You knew what they did. You remembered every insult, every manipulation, every micro cut they tried to hide beneath fake smiles. And instead of retaliating, you chose silence. The kind of silence that echoes, the kind that shifts atmospheres, the kind that replaces retaliation with revolution. And they hate you for it, because it left them exposed, unguided, small. There's elegance in not giving them the closure they expect. Toxic people want the final fight. They want to see you broken. They want you to beg, to chase, to rage. So when you simply stop participating, you flip the script. You leave them with unfinished tension, with consequences they can't twist into redemption. You leave them to face themselves, which is the one thing they were trying to avoid from the start. Your restraint was your refusal to carry their shame for one more step. And they felt it. They feel it every day now, in the silence that never speaks their name, in the respect you now give to yourself instead of them. Psychologically, people who thrive on power games are allergic to self-pro, in others and in themselves. Restraint, to them, is alien. It's threatening, because it's not about playing dead. It's about choosing your battlefield. You didn't run. You repositioned. You removed your energy from the stage and left them monologuing into a vacuum. They tried to define you by your emotions, but now they have nothing to point to. You've become a closed door, a locked vault, a sealed boundary. And it terrifies them, not because they want you back, but because they want the control back. You knew they weren't worthy of your rage. That's what they'll never forgive. That you took all of that fire and built something beautiful with it. A new life, a better focus, peace. They expected you to self-deserve so they could play savior. But you didn't. You grew. Quietly, without their name in your mouth, without their shadow on your back. You respected yourself too much to become the monster they were trying to provoke. And now they're left screaming into their own story, hoping someone will still believe them. They'll try to replicate your stillness, but it will look hollow. They'll try to mimic your calm, but it will feel rehearsed. Because real restraint comes from transformation, not tactics. And you transformed. Through every betrayal, every insult, every disappointment, you chose self-mastery over spectacle. You built boundaries instead of rebuttals. And now, they're chasing your ghost, trying to understand how you became untouchable. Well, they'll never find the answer because it was never about strategy. It was about soul. Let them wrestle with the silence. Let them drown in the questions they'll never have the right to ask. You didn't stay to explain. You walked to reclaim. Your restraint wasn't the absence of emotion. It was the presence of power. You mastered the art of not responding, and in doing so, you took back everything they thought they owned. Your story, your strength, your stillness. That is why they hate your restraint, because it proved one final, terrifying truth. You never needed to destroy them, to defeat them. You just had to stop engaging. And that was the most elegant victory of all.